A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, there's something very important, I think, that we should talk about by way of a new resource to help steer your family and your church community. To keep abreast of the latest insights and research, McCrindle Research has launched a new resource called The Undercurrents of Faith. It's about equipping Christian leaders with an understanding of the movements towards and, importantly, away from Christianity in Australia. Mark McCrindle is back with us. He's the founder and CEO of McCrindle Research. Mark, a special welcome back to 2020.
Appreciate that, Neil. Thank you.
Mark, how often do you release this sort of data? Because my suspicion is that there's an awful lot of people that would love to have this sort of insight when they're planning the future, not only of their own family, but also of their local church. You've got people who are on the eldership of their local church thinking where they're moving and decisions being made. How often are you coming out with this sort of research?
Well, the census is conducted every 5 years. We take that census data and analyse it a couple of times in that period. And so every couple of years, we do a really deep dive into not only census data, but surveys of Australians regarding faith, Christianity and belief. And this is the very latest of those national studies.
And so when you're looking at a whole group of studies and drawing some conclusions there, that actually gives a bit of a unique perspective, doesn't it?
Well, it does, because, people see the headline data around, let's say, census figures on religion, and famously, I think everyone who's across Christianity would have seen the data that in 15 years, the total proportion of Australians who said their religion was Christianity went from 61% down to 44%. That's a pretty big drop from sort of majority status in Australia to minority status in 15 years. But what we wanted to look at is what else is going on, because there is more to the story. And we've called this report Undercurrents of Faith, exploring Australians' renewed relationship with Christianity. Because here's what we found. Over that same period of time, the 15 years as Christianity has been dropping as recorded in the census data, the National Church Life Survey data shows that the proportion of Australians attending church at least once a month has increased from 15% to 21%. So it's not as though any measure of Christianity is fading and evaporating. Maybe cultural Christianity is somewhat dissipating, but the measures of the practice of faith and indeed those looking for meaning, purpose and belonging as experienced in Christianity, there are some measures to say there's an increase there.
When we talk increase, it's easy to say percentage increases, 15% to 21%, you just said there for that group of older Australians. Any ideas how many people that actually represents when you talk about a leap like 6%? What numbers are we talking about here?
Well, firstly, if we look at the proportion of people attending church, as I said, that's 21% of the population. We're talking about more than 5 million Australians. And so that's a significant number. That's more than will attend over any given weekend all the AFL matches, the NRL matches, the Super Rugby and the A-League combined. So we think we're a sports mad nation. Well, actually, we're a church-going nation still to some extent. Now, that 21% includes those attending church in the building, but it also includes those attending church online as regular churchgoers. It includes all denominations in that mix, including Catholic and Orthodox. But it's a sizable expression of Christianity and faith in Australia. But I'll give you one other figure, putting some numbers to it, Neil. Over the 5 years from 2016 to 2021, 11% of those who in 2016 said no religion on their census form, in 2021 said Christianity. So that, in other words, is a movement towards Christianity from no religion of 784,000 Australians. So yes, there's this movement to no religion, and that's 7 million Australians. There's this movement, about 10% of them on a census by census basis, moving towards Christianity as well.
Well, let's just stop and just pause to reflect, because I think what you've just shared is quite profound, that almost 800,000 extra Australians identified with Christianity in the most recent census. The overall numbers went down, but that's a huge increase, isn't it? On like almost 800,000 people. Now, Mark, is this primarily in an older generation?
It is. That's where we're seeing those who in the past had said no religion choose Christianity. And the way we get this data, people may not know that census forms, they're all de-identified, that Australian Bureau of Statistics census that we fill in every 5 years, but it is data matched. They know from a household perspective, or sometimes an individual perspective, they can track from that address what you said last time and what you said this time. So no one needs to worry about the privacy of that, because it's all de-identified and it's presented in a mass scale. But it's the longitudinal data set of census, and that's what we looked at. So we wanted to know, of those who said no religion last time, what proportion said Christianity this time? In other words, what proportion are moving to faith, even though there's a movement away from faith and Christianity? And that's a very interesting group. They are more likely to be older Australians, but that's interesting in itself, because older Australians are more likely on the census form to tick Christianity if they've been brought up with that. In other words, it's my tradition, it's my upbringing, it's my culture, I'll tick the box. So if they said no religion last time, they genuinely meant it. They're not just sort of going with the flow. And if they said Christianity this time, it's a more meaningful decision to embrace Christianity. They're not choosing it because it was their upbringing. After all, they weren't ticking it last time round. So this is a measure of conversion or movement to Christianity, not just a cultural identity with it.
Now, there's lots of dimensions to what we're talking about with this new study, these undercurrents. Let me just touch on a bunch of these, and you might like to choose the one you like to talk about. But undercurrent number 2, Australians are searching for purpose and meaning. You have undercurrent number 3, the Australians turning to Christianity may not be who you expect. Undercurrent 4, youth are on a quest for meaning. Number 5, movement away from Christianity is primarily driven by dissatisfaction with how it's practiced. And undercurrent number 6, regional areas are moving away from Christian identity faster than inner cities. Now, I know there's so much in all of that. Out of those undercurrents, which one do you think you'd like to give us some insight for? Because all of those are so important.
Yeah. Well, just that point about that second one about Australians searching for purpose and meaning, the materialism of our nation, the land of safety and opportunity, as much as we have, it hasn't really delivered purpose, meaning and belonging. And that's why we've found an increasing proportion of Australians, 45% in fact, say that they are extremely or very open to spiritual conversations that may involve a different perspective than their own. That's almost half of Australians saying, yeah, I'm up for the chat. We used to think that Aussies don't talk politics and religion. Well, now almost half of them are saying, I'm very open to talking about spiritual perspectives. In fact, we found that 19% are those who are open to changing their religion. That's 1 in 5 Australians. So maybe they're in that big group that say no religion or an alternate religion. 1 in 5 of them say, I'm open to it if I can be convinced of the truth in this. And while that second undercurrent about who's coming to Christianity, a lot of people think, well, if there is strong or remnant Christianity in Australia, it must be through migration, people coming here from more Christianized or religious nations. It's not the case. The average migrant or a recent migrant to Australia who said Christianity is 28% of the population compared to the average national, which is 44% of the population. In other words, migrants coming to Australia are less likely to say Christianity. In fact, they're more likely to say other religions than Christianity compared to the average Australian. So we're not bolstering our Christian numbers or staying that tide through migration. In fact, the opposite. So where we're seeing a return to Christianity or an engagement with Christianity, that's people moving from no Christianity or other religions rather than just ticking the box because, they've been brought up in a Christianized society.
Mark, what do you say to people who are saying, it's just a whole lot of number crunching, you can manipulate statistics and things like that? It seems to me that most of us, when we think about the growth of the Christian church or those things that cause people to move away from the Christian church, a lot of that's very much anecdotal. Something we heard, something we observed, it was just in our local community. Put that anecdotal evidence alongside reliable research. There seems to me to be something that is needed for every single one of us, an adjustment in the way that we think, the attitudes that we have to what God is doing in Australia. How do you describe the value here of your undercurrents of faith? Because it seems to me this is just the resource so many Christian believers have been hanging out for.
I think it's so important for any church leader or ministry organisation to keep an eye on this data. We think, young people are moving away from Christianity, and this data highlights that, but they're also the most open to spiritual conversations. They're 50% more likely than the baby boomers to say, I'm open to having spiritual conversations. They're the most likely to be searching for meaning and belonging. When we looked at the top reasons Australians turn to Christianity in this study, number one is a feeling of spiritual connection and a sense of the divine presence. So people, God is moving, in people's hearts and lives. Or the second most common reason people came to the Christian faith, that they found personal meaning and purpose in Christianity. Or the third reason, that Christianity offers answers to questions they couldn't answer elsewhere. So people are coming to faith from that personal perspective. But what's fascinating, I think this is where the applications are for ministry leaders, is that when people are moving away from Christianity, so that big group that used to say Christianity and now have moved to no religion, that drop from 61% Christianity to 44%, what's happening there? Number one reason of people moving away from Christianity is disappointment in the church. Number two was that the religion was no longer relevant or meaningful in their life. Number three was disillusioned with Christianity and how it's practiced by leaders or institutions. So in other words, people move to faith from that personal search, meaning, identity and experience with God, but they move away from identifying with Christianity more from a social perspective, from how brand Christianity or brand church is performing. And I think, therefore, the Christian faith is both a personal walk, but we are a community of believers. We have Christian ministries, organizations and churches, and that puts on a display to our society. And if we're doing poorly at that public measure, then we can't really be salt and light, and we will see numbers dwindle, and that's what this data is highlighting.
It's wonderful insight, Mark McCrindle. Now, for listeners who want to access this, is there a at-a-glance opportunity to be able to see a big snapshot of where these sorts of things are? Can you then go in a little bit deeper? Do you need to subscribe to get the more in-depth commentary around the trends here? How do listeners access this Undercurrents of Faith new resource?
Yeah, well, there's a 40-page report for people who like the data, but there's a simple A5, 2-page infographic for those who just want the summary version in pictorial form. And both of those are freely available. If people just search for Undercurrent of Faith, they'll find it, or through our website, McCrindle.com.
All right, it's the Undercurrents of Faith, and you just heard it from Mark McCrindle. You can access this free of charge. Go to the McCrindle website, mccrindle.com.au. mccrindle.com.au. It's called The Undercurrents of Faith, and Mark McCrindle is the founder and CEO of McCrindle Research. Mark, outstanding insight. I'll put you on notice. I want you back again another day so we can talk about some of these things in a little more depth, but just wonderful insight. Thanks so much for joining us today on 2020.
I'll look forward to that. Thanks so much, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.